Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Creating Black Futures panel. This week we are celebrating non-binary modes of expression. And when we started to put together this festival, I started to make a list of all the binaries, false binaries in the world. I just made lists of binaries, and in that list I thought about fantasy and reality, past and future, art and activism, things that most of us here, I think, agree that art and activism are not opposed. But then thinking about ways to approach these ideas with people that inspire us. And so that is why we have all these incredible people on stage right now. And so our moderator is going to be the brilliant Raina Gossett, and I'm just going to say a few words about Raina, and then we'll get the conversation started. I met Raina the way I meet all of the favorite people in my life, in a gay dive bar. And immediately we started talking, and we were both working for social justice-oriented organizations. Raina did a lot of really amazing work with the Silvia Rivera Law Project, and is just like a powerhouse organizer, activist, creator. Recently, she's also been making films, and she, along with Sasha Wurtzel, wrote and directed Happy Birthday, Marsha, a short film about legendary trans activist Marsha P. Johnson. So that's really exciting. She was the 2014-2016 activist in residence at Barnard College Center for Research on Women. She also was a 2007 Soros Justice Fellow, 2009 Stonewall Community Foundation honoree, the recipient of the 2016 Ackerman Institute Community Award. She's just amazing, and I'm so happy that she's here with us today. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Raina. Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming out on a snowy post-snowstorm day. I'm really thrilled to be here and just basking in the brilliance of this panel. People who I've just long been admiring. So what we're gonna do is, it's gonna be pretty relaxed and chill, and I'm gonna pose some questions. We might pose questions to each other. We might ask what we weren't answered but wanted to be. And I'm gonna start off by reading everyone's bio. So Kim Drew, aka Museum Mammy, received her BA from Smith College in Art History and AFAM Studies with a concentration in Museum Studies. An avid lover of Black culture and art, Drew first experienced the art world as an intern in the director's office of the Studio Museum in Harlem. Her time at the Studio Museum inspired her to start the Tumblr blog Black Contemporary Art, sparking her interest in social media. Drew is currently the social media manager at the Met. Let's welcome Kim Drew. Andre Carrington's research focuses on the cultural politics of race and gender and genre in the 20th Black and American literature and the arts. His first book, Speculative Blackness, interrogates the meaning of race and genre through studies of science fiction, fanzines, comics, film, and television, and other speculative fiction texts. His current research project, Audio Futurism, explores literary adaptations and studio studies through the analysis of science fiction radio plays based on the work of Black authors. Welcome, Andre. Nava Kosta is a dance artist, educator, Black Dominican, transsexual, queer, native New Yorker. He attended the Martha Graham School of Contemporary Dance, NYC, American Dance Festival, and Cal Arts. In 2010, Niv received an Arts and Social Change grant from the Leeway Foundation, with which he presented two solo shows titled Denzel and Denzel Prelude at Studio 34 in Philly. He moved back to New York and presented Denzel Superstructure through Movement Movement Research Open Performance and the Community Education Center. Welcome, Niv. E. Jane is a Black woman, artist, and sound designer currently based in Philadelphia. Their work is a critical inquiry surrounding softness, safety, futurity, cyberspace, and how subjugated bodies navigate the media. Their interdisciplinary practice incorporates digital images, video and performance, and sound-based and installation works. Welcome. So we were thinking with these questions of creating Black futures, if we could just spend some time introducing ourselves and our work, and as a means of introduction, speak a little bit about the ways in which speculative fiction or futurism, or really at its root, how I understand speculative fiction is kind of imagining a way out of no way, has inspired or influenced you in your work.
So when I did my graduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania, and while I was there, Lorna Simpson told me to read Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. And she told me to read it because I was having a problem in my studio with sort of like I was only making work about kind of like the experiences I had lived and where I had been. And she was like, well, you have to take your character somewhere that you've never imagined going before. And I was like, how do I even do that? Like, I don't even know what you mean. And she was like, well, read Wild Seed. And once I read Wild Seed, I understood, because it was like she was imagining a world that like didn't exist inside of the world we were in. Octavia Butler, I mean. Yeah.
I'm going to jump on that and go with the Octavia Butler strain. So I was watching the Star Wars Holiday Special, which came out in 1977, and it came out directly after the first film was released. And there's a scene where we're visiting Chewbacca's family, and in this scene, Chewbacca's father, Itchy, enters into this machine called the Holo Projector, or the Mind Evaporator. They have two different names in the saga. And he steps into it, or sits in it, sort of like a hairdryer from like the 1970s. You sit in it, and then it comes over your head, and you put a proton chip in it. And he has this experience with a young Diane Carroll. She plays this character called Mermea, and she sings this song, This Minute Now, and it struck me, because I was sort of like, whoa, first of all, Diane Carroll, second of all, this song. Also, Itchy was really pervy, and it struck me as like a moment, right? This like Black femme character in space and time in this holographic fantasy, essentially, in concept was created by Itchy. So this is his fantastical desire. And as a young Diane Carroll, who's a powerful figure, yet she sort of has a subservient role. She's this exotic, alien, bodacious, sentient holograph. And so for me, that started my like interest with Black representation and science fiction and disco and astrophysics. And I kind of went down this spiral and created this multi-year project called Disco Tropic, which is still touring. But I did, in that spiral, also see this documentary called Black Sci-Fi. It's very short. It's on YouTube. I think PBS created it. But Octavia's in it. She says she's listening to like a sci-fi on the radio in the 1950s, and she's like, I can do better than this. And so she starts writing her like Black protagonist-centered narratives. And so I feel like Disco Tropic was me contributing to, or is me and my friends and my community contributing to representations of us in the future.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, one of the things I just thought about in relationship to your question in terms of speculative futures, I feel so much of the work that I do in the visual arts world is kind of speculative fiction, because I'm really interested in centering on Black narratives in a way that I find to be unorthodox. But it's just kind of my natural way. I don't really think about the work I'm doing as a critique of the canon. I think about it as an inflation of ideas, as being able to breathe life into the stories that perhaps have been overlooked, or at least ensure the foundation for the stories that come after them. So yeah, to piggyback on that and thinking about like sci-fi and Blackness, and thinking about something like the film Hidden Figures, right? Where it's like, what? Like, what? Like the whole sheet was ripped off of history, and it's just like, no. Not only were Black people scientists, not only were they Black women, but they put someone on the fucking moon, And it's just like, oh, we just gonna breeze past that in the history books? Like, come on. So what can we do as people who are imagining futures to ensure that those stories don't get overlooked? Like, that's what I think is the work of especially this generation of thinkers, with the advent of the internet and social media, just being able to say, like, you will not forget about Katherine Johnson, and this will not be buried in your government website. These people will be forefronted because they should be, not as a means of saying, oh, because they're this or that or that. No, they are excellent. They are masters at their craft. And that, unfortunately for people of color and marginalized communities, is like fiction, that we can be celebrated that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up reading comics, and especially when I was like a middle school, maybe. There were comics from a company called Milestone Media, and they still have some properties that are active now. The late Dwayne McDuffie was one of the masterminds behind them, but also a writer named Christopher Priest who wrote comics for a long time, and a writer who's now a friend of mine, Ivan Velez Jr. And they were, at the time, like, I wasn't even prepared for it. It was sort of an anticipation of interest that I would really develop later. And reading those comics that were from a black-owned company that featured characters who were black and Latino and Asian American and Native and in just all kinds of wild superhero scenarios, I learned about them as I was growing up, that some of the authors were queer and trans, and just to see that kind of creativity from people of color in the early 90s at a stage in my life when it was just like, oh, these are comics. It just enriched my sense of blackness in comics so much, and my sense of what comics were a window onto. And in a way, it doesn't sort of feel like an idea that was before its time, but it was really, when I think about it being like more than 20 years ago now, an idea whose time had already come and sort of needs to be put back on the forefront so that we move forward from it. And from my experience growing up reading comics and watching science fiction on TV and movies and stuff, I really became a fan. And it's really my interest and my attitudes as a fan that gave me the discipline and the motivation to be a scholar. Because having to follow something, having to look really hard for what you want, and also doing something like reading because you want to do it and because it's deeply fulfilling, is really just ideal and lovely. And so in every way that, the privilege of being a scholar allows me to do that, it really goes back to sort of carving out that imaginary space as a young person and finding, that I don't even have to, like, even, in the position I was in as a young person, I didn't have the resources to imagine myself there, but knowing that there are really people like me who grow up and make it and make that space for me has been something that I am really grateful to be able to appreciate.
I think all of you touched on this, but what your responses make me think about is how central imagination is to conceiving political possibilities. And so I was thinking a little bit about the Black Freedom Movement, or otherwise known as the Civil Rights Movement, Freedom Summer Project, and the Freedom Schools, and thinking about how when Freedom Schools were organized, people would come together and ask kind of three core questions, like, what does the dominant culture have that we do want? What does the dominant culture have that we don't want? What do we have already that we want more of? And I think science fiction, to me, pushes us to ask all three of those questions, right? Especially blackness in science fiction. And so I was curious if you wanted to answer any of those questions through a lens of science fiction. What do we have already that we want more of? What, in terms of kind of the dominant culture's approach to science fiction, are we just had enough of, right? And what do we want to steal? What do we want to steal back that's been stolen from us?
One thing we have now that I would like us to continue having is race consciousness. It's important to me that we don't envision the future as a movement away from knowing who we are and having a sense of cultural sensibilities that are shaped by our experiences and things. And so to the extent that the dominant culture valorizes that in one way now, I would like to see us keep it and keep making it useful, because it's so useful and so vital for us today that I would love to live in a future where it's not vital just to our survival, but something that we have because we want to have it.
Yeah, I think a lot about that too. I love all three of those questions. I've never heard them articulated that way. But I think the third question is the most interesting to me. Like, what do we have that we want more of? Especially because I think within the worlds of literature and or just all the arts, like the moving arts, the reading arts, the visual arts, there's this idea of what a dominant culture is that I'm just so disinterested in. It's that's okay, cool. Yeah, you guys have money and power and all those things, but there's still all the same insecurities. There's still all these other systems through which we all navigate. And so as I think about futurity and think about specifically something like the freedom movement, and if we are in one right now, which I feel we are in many ways, unfortunately, but fortunately, because it makes for great cultural production. But if I could point to something that I'd like more of that we already have, it's just, I think that there's this irreverence that has been, and me speaking myself as a millennial person with 2 legs and 2 arms, I think millennials are kind of branded as arrogant, taking the elevator instead of the stairs kind of people. And I kind of love that. Yes. You know, I love that as a thing. I love it as an ideology where it's just like, no, I don't have time to wait. Like the impatience, I think breeds this beautiful reverence. And I think if there's more that we could have, of course, it's education, an understanding of where that impatience comes from. Because I think it's valuable and not necessarily something that makes us feeble-minded. I think it just means that we were born frustrated. We're born weary. Like, that's why I love Solange. It's just like nail on the head. Like, I'm mad. I'm very mad. And I talk to elders every day. And we're mad about a lot of the same things. And that in itself is infuriating.
Do you guys remember hearing recently after the election that everyone woke up black the next day? What if like you didn't hear this? Nobody else heard this? It's just me? Okay, I guess I have a weird news feed. Okay, well I heard that and I wished it actually were true. I wish that everyone could have woken up the next day black and trans and queer. Right? Like if we're gonna I want to just like recall the imaginative part of this. Like I really wish that there was a way for everyone to suddenly remember what it's like to be black and queer and trans and disabled and immigrant. All of the marginal identities, right? Like I want everyone to experience all of the oppressive forces because empathy, because solidarity, because that's what we need. We need like a shared understanding, a shared context. And for that we need some deep solidarity and parallels. And I feel like it was a joke, but I was also like, actually, in some way, the intersection existed that day. The intersection was like, yo. All the neoliberals were like, oh, let me dust off my megaphone, like, and flexing my protest muscles, like, you know, and I'm out here like, I've been protesting. My life is a protest, okay? I'm tired. It's your turn.
What about now more than ever?
Yeah. Ew. So that's like sort of, I'm like, okay, let's go there. Everyone just like wake up.
I definitely, in terms of like the science fiction we have now, I wish like I've been thinking a lot about the Hunger Games series and how it's basically like scaring, it's it's like an American dystopian series and it's like scaring white people into thinking like it could be worse. It could be so much worse than it is now. But when you see how black people are treated there, it's like, I don't know, it's like we're off in the side and we're also still getting the most brutality like in that series, but we're like hardly even in the frame at the same time, and it's really frustrating because the whole series should be about black people because it would actually be more accurate. Like if Katniss was a black woman, I mean, like that would be a lot more rich of a narrative, but I feel like they're also stealing a lot of narratives from the civil rights movement. I mean, X-Men did that too. Like a lot of people say that the debate between like Xavier and Magneto is actually like a Malcolm X, Martin Luther King sort of back and forth. And it's just like, I think like what I would love is like more sci-fi that actually has black characters and black stories dealing with the dystopia we have to live in and have been living in for like over the past 300 years, instead of dystopia that's just sort of like scaring white people into like being grateful for what they have.
Are there tools or tropes that you use as artists, as writers, as culture producers, as creative people who are surviving this world that you draw from science fiction or fantasy or speculative fiction?
I love thinking about propaganda. Thinking again about Katniss, like the propos that she does. Like even this I feel like is a bit of a propos because I'm like really scared. Like someone could come in and like hurt us, you know what I mean? But we're like on this stage anyway saying what we have to say, and like Katniss like kind of like articulates that she's like in the field and she's like, I'm fighting, and then the cameras goes off, you know, so it's like I don't know, I think about like what a propo could be and like how you like use your anxiety to understand like, yeah, you're really afraid, but you have to go out every day and like live, or like, you know, show people that living is still possible, even if you don't even feel like it is.
That's so right.
Yeah, I really draw a lot from the moments when science fiction and fantasy narratives do take it seriously, and often, you know, when they're created by white and cis and straight authors, they take decades to really get dragged into dealing with the consequences of what they set up. But I feel like it's helpful to know that that's possible, right? That if you just keep dragging something into the present, it will eventually catch up and become useful for imagining the future. So I draw a lot of inspiration from like Storm in the X-Men, who is like, oh, it's great, it's like you're a mutant and you're hated and feared, but also she's a black woman. Like, she is not like, oh, being a mutant is sort of like being black, or like it's sort of like being queer, but I'm like, but she is a black woman, so it's not that it's like it, it's that it complicates it further. And that layering of different experiences and refracting them through different lenses, it's possible to tell stories like that and to make them legible to people. But with things like comics, that's, you know, a story that takes 20 and 30 and 40 years to tell. So even folks who should have known better when they wrote it may still be alive to tell it, but if they don't, then it's not that the work goes away, it becomes the work of another generation to hang on to. And I think that patience is actually not something I draw from science fiction and comics, but it's something that I think I bring to it, because you have to have the patience of Job to deal with, like, you know, social change on an intergenerational scale.
I love the process of translating futurism from fantasy into like my present day futurism, and thinking about like Audre Lorde and how she is a futurist in my eyes, right? And like thinking about the ways that, okay, like, yes, their imagination and play are very important, sensuality, all things that are very important, movement, body, all things that are held within my practice, but also where is a space that intersects with actually creating progress or actually influencing a conversation or holding a platform or having meeting spaces or organizing, right? That's a bridge that I've been told cannot be bridged as a black queer artist, right? In a white, like, art world or dance world, I've been told they cannot be bridged over and over and over again. And I'm here to say that they can, because I live that reality every day. And I've had to say that and fight for that for a long time. I think probably we can all relate to that on some level. But yeah, wanting to deal with futurism outside of the realm of fantasy, starting with imagination, but really having practical uses or practical applications of them. I don't have the silver bullet answer, like I can't do this alone. I need, like, you guys, we need each other. And that's also the magic. There's the futurism, organizing together, centering self-care, centering holistic practices, having places to heal. That's my futurism right now. I need to be able to live through the long fight, right? I want to have a sustainable life. And so that means actually centering my health. And that being like a radical means, and as Audre Lorde says, self-care is warfare, right? I think that's like something very centered in like black femme subjectivity now, at least in the visibility surrounding that. And I'm loving it. I'm really, really loving it, because that's been missing. And I'm always trying to sort of find that place, right? And these boundaries or these constructions, white walls, white institutions, all these things tell me that that space does not exist for me. And so I'm trying to constantly build that out. I think this is a part of it, like actually having sat on a panel this strong, but also feeling like I won't be the only one fighting for what my ideals are. Yes. This is like a revolution. This is historic. Like, all of these brains are really like on some other tip. And I hope you, if you're not familiar with the work, like get to the internet immediately. But this is, yeah, I mean, this is a futurism. Yeah. Black folks taking a stage like this in Chelsea, in this time, and talking unapologetically about what we do.
Yeah, speaking of black femme futures, like my favorite thing, and this is going to sound facetious after your brilliant statement. I love costumes.
Yes.
Like I love it. I love it. Like if there's something that I could take from sci-fi or thinking about what, perhaps a mainstream media has that other groups should have. I think about budgets, of course, and like thinking about something like I thought about the Hunger Games because we're in sync. And I was thinking about looking at a movie like Hunger Games or looking at Battle Royale, and then thinking about, I always watch black films and what those kinds of budgets could do within the realm of black film and black cinema. But at any rate, more specifically to your original question, I love costumes. I love costumes and arriving in places and fucking thriving and just looking amazing and taking on that tradition of like every day or like for me, I'm from New Jersey. I should preface it with that. So like I'm no stranger to glitter or like matching all my socks to my hairpins. And that was just kind of like the culture I was steeped in. And so I work at the Metropolitan Museum now, and I often get comments about my outfits. And for a while I started to like butch it down. And then I was just like, no, fuck this. Like I'm here. I can do my job with this like headpiece on. Yes. And so I think a lot about, why I love sci-fi, and it's all optics. And of course, like I'm a visual arts person, but it's all just like watching these things move, especially when you have characters like X-Men, where it's just like their costume tells you so much about their powers. And I love that, especially thinking too about navigating New York as a black femme and thinking about my friends who are black femmes and like under just like this unreasonable amount of risk, just fucking walking home at night and what it means, like how powerful it is to just see someone like wear their shit and know that is it's not just a shoe. Exactly. It's not just a lip. Exactly. It's really so much deeper than that. And saying, I hope you make it home safe is like a thing that breaks my heart that I have to say every time I see someone. And I think that if there's any way to provide levity in that, it's just saying like, I hope you make it home safe in those amazing pumps, because those pumps and you are so important.
That's so right. I mean, I think, I'm thinking about how we're in a moment when black femmes, black trans, and black gender nonconforming people are being killed like never before, right? The highest rates of violence that we're facing, and how important in this moment where there is no way of like making a way out of it. And when I was listening to, one of the things I was thinking about is the joy, right? Joy as a way to make our way out of no way right now. And so I was curious, like, where do y'all find joy? Where in science fiction and black speculative work do you find joy?
So there's it's this kind of not science fiction. It's like Tina Camp, who teaches at Barnard, I believe, said this thing about black feminist futurity, where she said that it was like believing in a future that like can't exist but like must, and like that in turn like realizes it, like you're imagining it into existence. And like I've been thinking a lot about that as a place to find joy, like basically like seeing past the moment and being like, it's gonna be so great when we're out of this though, like I can see it, and just like envisioning that space. And like I do work with installation, and with installation you're literally like seeing a world past this one and building it up. And so you like kind of just to say like, one day we'll see this, and this will be here, and this will happen, and we won't be here anymore. And just like looking towards that and not letting go of that vision has really been giving me a lot of joy lately.
Yes.
Yeah, meeting spaces, just like literally IRL, getting off your phone, getting offline, get together, whatever it is, smoke some weed, watch some TV, Netflix and chill, cuddle, go to the store, whatever it is, like anything that disarms us, essentially. Anything to find like laughter and humor and to rest. I'm really into black power naps right now.
Yeah, that's so right. That's so right.
Yeah. Black power naps with friends. Highly encouraged. I should trademark that.
You really need a trademark.
But yeah, rest. Oh my goodness. Like, rest. We're in Trump's America. Period.
I get some joy even with how frustrating all the information about the world is. I get some joy on Twitter. mostly because like every day, like probably like twice a day, there's an occasion to be like, God, black people are so brilliant. Like we are so brilliant. And I think for a while, because I am an introvert, it's hard for me to embrace the like emphasis on improvisation in black art and stuff that has been so vital to so many people who have taught me so much, because I'm like, but then I have to know people and see them doing the creativity in an improvisational basis, or like go to where the musical performance is happening, and I would rather stay here in this library. But in part because it's a form of writing, and in part because it works really like as a kind of relay, right? Where ideas and forms, words, just travel from person to person and repeat and come back remixed within like seconds, minutes, days, like very short life cycles. I think that kind of collaborative space that exists on Twitter, between me and like people who are colleagues, people who have become acquaintances and friends, that means, it's really wonderful. Like, as much as there is a constant flow of information that it's healthy to sort of, insulate from, like, so that, the edges are less sharp, it's really great to have that constant sort of relay going on, because it's just a reminder that, like, God damn it, like, we just, like, everything like that we find to do with every technology just amplifies all of our practices, all of our traditions, all of our capacities to innovate, all of our needs to like repurpose existing tools. So I find joy in that. And my dog.
I've gotten really into memes. And meme share, I have like 5 different meme share groups in Instagram. If you guys want to join one after this, like, I'm taking applications. I followed all of these different accounts, and then I started to do the group chatting with it, and it like has changed everything because it satisfies all of my needs. It's like really dark humor, and then being able to trade with friends, and then you see how weird your friends are, and then your friends see how weird you are, like very casually. Because I think a meme is perfectly fine and normal, and it's like a cat like pretending to deep throat something, and I'm like, oh my god, this is hilarious. It's like a cat picture, and then people are like, yo, your humor is really fucked up. But I love it because it's just this immediate departure, and this like, I work doing social media for a living, and so finding these places for departure within spaces of commerce is always really fun for me. But any opportunity, I think, Niv is a person that I often go to just for like cozies, and even if it's just like a text message. I mean, spaces for joy. This is absolutely a space for joy. I love nothing more than having a microphone. I'm a Leo, and so like this is my everything. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting, especially thinking about, and just to like veer away from it a little bit, post-election, and thinking about dominant cultures and like the moment of waking up. And I had so many people who were just like, how are you? But how are you? Right. And I'm like, I'm fine. Like, I'm like not surprised. And also still here trying to do my thing. Like, I showered this morning. You haven't showered in days. I don't understand what's so difficult for you to understand that, like, the progress that you somehow imagined is just not a reality. It was bizarre. It was like the most bizarre dystopian few days I've had, I think, in my life, or at least my life post attending a liberal arts college. But I was just like so confused, like bewildered, and then started to get angry again because I was like, wow, people are coming to me because they think I'll be sadder than them. For some reason, they would think that someone who, like, it was just like the most bizarre and almost disgusting thing, and that's why instead of going to the Women's March, I went to Cuba. Yes. I was just like, I'm getting off the internet, bye. Yes. Have fun with your signs.
That's been a real thing, right? Everyone with their, anyway, sorry.
The pussy hats. Just to add one more thing, also I've been getting a lot of joy out of the club. Because,
yes,
the club. Together, dancing, music. Yeah, that's totally been like my only space that I've really been going out in lately is the club, really. Like, I stay in my house and then I go to the club and then I go back home. Because the only place I feel safe outside of my house right now. I don't know.
There's something to be said too for like black queer pedestrian culture. Like, I was thinking a lot about just, of course, the violence enacted on our bodies, but then thinking about something like us all, like not all of us, but people being like, okay, Uber's evil, so then it requires us to be in the trains again in a certain way. And so what then type of violence is there that people are going through mentally or assuming might happen to their bodies, and then how do we make it to the club? or how do we make it to our jobs, or how do we make it to these other different places? And then, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that because I just started clubbing again too, and it's like it is the most freeing, amazing thing. And like, I love to hold a business meeting on the dance floor. I know you don't. But it's just the place that we like come to meet, you know, like some people go to the church or some people, you know, like whatever, but like I am there on the dance floor like, what are you up to? Like, how's your mom? You know, like.
I'm so glad you said that because like I literally tweeted the other day like rebaptized in the club. Like that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Like
I think it's a very black space, the club, right? Like I think gathering culture is very part of the Afro diaspora as like a space to transform. Like we gather for power, we gather to re-energize, recharge our batteries, but also to organize ourselves, right? And be able to then fight another day. Like a club space is a transformative space.
Exactly.
I love the club. I also love church, and they're kind of the same. They're synonymous for me right now. And I mean, I don't go to church, but club is church,
Exactly.
right? Club as church. And that, I mean, there's a lot to be said there, like the resonating bass and like bass as an Afro-diasporic sound, and like how that vibrates our bodies and the healing properties of that. Like Fanny Sosa talks about this in her work all the time. If you don't know Fanny Sosa's work, get thee to Fanny Sosa's page. She's getting her doctorate in twerking, and is talking about the healing properties of bass and also the healing properties of twerking, and how like Afro diaspora like really centers this movement, but also the sound and how we heal ourselves, right? Like I literally have this movement in my body. Not all of us think we do, but it's very familiar. We've had it since we were children. It was just sort of white supremacy created these boxes around our asses, right?
Exactly.
Said put it away. But twerking is sort of like an act of resistance. It's like a radical, like forceful, like nope.
Exactly.
Deal with it.
Andre?
It's just that is so right. Like I think of how, you know, like in my profession in particular, we tell ourselves a lot that we have gotten over the like mind body duality. We're like, nope, we're past that. And I'm like, are we? Because one thing I've done in one of my classes is so I showed Janelle Monáe's long form video for Many Moons, and we talked about it, and they were like very smart. But in order to show it, I realized like, oh, the bass on the AV system doesn't go up high enough to really hear this. And I'm like, we are not going to learn if you can't hear the entire bass line. Like we are missing knowledge, and like because not everybody in the room will feel it. And I'm like, even like this is something that exists outside of this space, and bringing it into this space is an educational experience, but like the structures of knowledge production and the forms of knowledge that we like walk around with in our bodies and that resonate with us, like literally resonate, like we have the capacity to learn and to know things in those ways, and there's a real underutilized capacity that we have as people that I think we deny ourselves access to when we sort of put race and class boundaries around like how you can know, right, and how you can show that you know, right, and that we embody those ways of knowing without being able to say so. It's actually painful, right? It should not work like that. And I think it's something that makes you know, higher ed and that makes education in general like a really difficult space, and at the same time makes it really admirable and really defiant for people to go out and create that space for themselves in school, in the club, elsewhere.
Yeah, talk about like propaganda, you know, like propaganda like surrounding our bodies, and like a dissociation of our bodies to self. Our bodies never lie to us, you know, like this is not like some neo-science like energy based nothing. This is you are an organic being, and your emotions, your person, all of everything that goes through your brain is completely a part of your chemical balances, but also your muscles. The way you hold your body, how you sleep, how you grip your jaw, all those things are very connected to your brain and your heart, right? We have neurons not just in this part of our body, we have neurons around here as well, which is also why like Kundalini twerk is very important. It's that knowledge that we're always being shut down, right? It's that propaganda that we should be putting it away, when really this, you know, like Fanny Sosa says, it's the ghetto of the body. Right? This is your ghetto. At least it's been ghettoized by colonists, right? And so we need to, in order to like really disrupt that and like really try to break free from that, we need to literally act in resistance and connect ourselves to ourselves, right? Through our bodies, through our physical selves. Movement, meditation, mindfulness, presencing, all these somatic practices that you could do. But like literally, think about how many times white supremacy tells us that our bodies are not on the priority list. Like the amount of production that we literally, product-based life that we live on the daily. Like we need to produce, and that is literally the mechanism that excludes our body always. And so I just like urge everyone, whatever your jam is, get yourself moving, get in touch with your body, listen to your body's truths.
Let's have one more. I mean, what I'm thinking about with the club is just thinking about the constant regulation of black space, right? And the constant regulation of queer, transgender, non-conforming black space, and how white supremacy is so invested in isolation, right? Like how when we're together, we are so powerful, right? We're capable of transforming the world. And of course, white supremacy doesn't want us at the club, right? Or at church as the club. One of the things that I was also thinking about when listening to y'all's brilliance and like it just radiating from this panel was about impossibility, right? How we are living impossibility right now in so many ways. I was thinking about like Marsha P. Johnson's freedom dreams that like she pushed forward into time, you know, and like how many of us are living those right now. And I was wondering if there is a particular impossibility that you're moving towards, you're striving for, or you see other people moving towards or creating that you wanted to share with each other.
I mean, a thing that I think about a lot is like, how do we make culture that loves us? Like, you know, how do we make culture that loves like black, queer, trans people? How do we make culture that loves black women? How do we make culture that loves black men? Like, you know, and like thinking, honest, this is so crazy because I'm just like, Lee Daniels, but okay. Lee Daniels' new show Star is based in Atlanta, and it's not based in nice Atlanta. It's like rooted primarily in a hair shop. And that is like I never thought I would see a narrative on television about a hair shop in the South. Like, there's something so beautiful about it. But even, I mean, it's on Fox, right? So it's beautiful, but at a cost. You know, Fox is still, controls companies that are like actually hurting black people probably more than helping them ultimately, and probably doesn't have that much interest in like black people thriving in the future. But they're giving Lee Daniels this platform, and he's like being a great trickster inside of it and like making like culture that is like really trying to love black people. And I think like just like more of that, because it feels really impossible. Like I was reading this thing the other day, like where Fred Moten was asking like, is it possible to like love blackness? And it's like, you know, I want to believe that it is too. Like he talks about like, you know, wanting to believe that it's true, and like exhaustion and trying to try out that impossibility. And like, you know, I'm really trying to go there, like making culture that loves us and like keeping that outside of commerce and outside of selling us, but like not like, yeah. So not trying to make culture that sells us, but tries to make culture that like loves us instead. And I don't know, I think that's a really hard thing to move towards.
This isn't exactly mine, but I've come now to this point where I have some great friends in my world who are self-care warriors, and I had no idea. I had no idea that the most successful people are the people who are napping. I had literally no fucking clue. Like, I got my first foot rub the other night, and I highly recommend reflexology. I just didn't know that that was a part of the practice. I started traveling for the first time for work. It takes such a toll on your body. And I'm not going crazy places. I'm going to like Baltimore, and I'm like exhausted. And so the friends that I want to mention are Sarah Lewis, who's a professor at Harvard and just like brilliant thinker, amazing. Jenna Wortham, who's a writer for the Times. We're working on a book together, An Impossible Future. And then John Gray, who's a chef running this company called Ghetto Gastro. And literally any of the three of them will give you like the best healthcare tips ever, and they're all centered in just pure care, like pure, unapologetic, just like getting a rub down. And I didn't realize how that could be a space of radicality, and also just like that was just not something in the way I was raised. Like my parents divorced when I was 6. I never went to therapy until I was an adult. I always thought that these things were reserved for fragile people, which in my upbringing read as white people. And so to know that Black strength and Black excellence is something that is kind of this luscious field that needs to be tilled and really cared for, and needs to be cared for by committee also, has been something that's just totally changed the way that I operate in the world. And so, yeah, like just the impossible future of just understanding that the future can be luscious and like smell like lavender.
And like how so many like hurt people, disabled people, fragile people, soft people who are all Black have always been changing the world too, right? And like we need what we need in order to keep doing that. And that's an impossibility, right? Like that is so real. Like we need what we need in order to keep tilling that field. I'm really connecting with that.
And then we could also like have so many different bodies. Like just to that point too, like thinking about, or for me when I think we all do it when we idolize our heroes. We're just like, no, they're perfect. They're perfect and they're successful. And then it's like, you don't think about the times when they've fallen and then they had to get back up, or the times when they were never up because perhaps, you know, they live life in a wheelchair. Or like, there's just so many possibilities for what excellence can look like, and it's not always about being in competition with it. Like, why have heroes when you can have peers has been kind of my mantra.
Exactly.
Heroes.
Heroes.
I feel like I like want basically the list, the long ass list that I would create for all of you right now would include definitely all these people on this stage right now. The person who I mentioned earlier, Fanny Sosa. And I mean, I'm just like, there's so many. I'm like Jay Boogie, Tiger Paw, Bearcat, like also a lot of nightlife people who I feel like are transforming on a different level, on a molecular level. They're like creating spaces or holding spaces and being intentional about it in another realm, right? Like the nightlife realm, which I also navigate. And I mean, I'm sort of like forgetting what else you want to know besides like the people, but I am just like really, I feel like also new Shiros, Piros, Eros are being born every day at the same time. You know, I teach at NYU and have been for the last 3 years, co-teaching with Lyle Ashton Harris in Steinart, and so much of what I've been learning through the process of being a teacher there is the students are more like younger and younger, more equipped with the language and the tools that I wasn't dealing with at age of 19 or 18, you know? Of course, it's NYU, these kids are mad privileged, and so there's all that intersection, right? But I come in and I'm like, hey, like, what does Black liberation mean to you? You know, what does white supremacy mean to you? How are you mapping your artistry, your career, or your interest in this passion within the context of society, you know? I'm not interested in creating or fostering folks who are not gonna hold that, you know? And so much of that is like my students have to hold that, but also the people I really keep close, the people who I wanna organize with are also holding that. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be said also to be someone living within so many like abject identities, right? Trans, queer, Black, dealing with depression, also like a professional artist, extremely poor, traveling a bunch, still poor. You know, there's a lot that people don't realize that, you know, I have to live on the regular, right? Like just because I was in the Alicia Keys video doesn't mean I'm not trans. Or that I don't still deal with being Black and trans, right? Like still dealing with microaggressions or macroaggressions on the set, you know, or like off the set or right outside the door, you know? And so that, like, I'm always trying to hold that. People sort of tend to do this game, this sort of like removing of humanity just because you have a platform or because you have the microphone. And that's a tough one because I feel like that's each of us or the people who are doing that are separating also themselves from like reality, or there's a dissociation that's happening. Like, no. Like money did that to us, guys. Like capitalism really did that to us. Please don't like push me further away, take away my humanity, or not realize that I also like go home alone at night and I feel unsafe at times. Like don't stop remembering that. Don't stop remembering that I'm also living those truths. I'm not speaking for us, I'm speaking with us. I want to speak with you. You know, I can only speak about my experience, but I'm just like constantly trying to build with folks who are really holding those intersections. Just because I'm forced to live here, where I literally can have this like seat like this, where I can see a lot of conceits, right?
It's also one of those things, sorry to talk again, but I've been thinking a lot about imagination and how many times in creative fields it's denied to marginalized bodies.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, okay, it's February, and so the last week of January, we're going to invite all the black people we know to do this thing. Yeah. And then it's going to be March, and we're going to do, you know, and thinking about how there can be a fullness and this ripeness in every opportunity, and how in the same way that things are ripe can be sour. You know, like I've had so many crazy instances on sets, and my life now is very much set to set. And it's just like absurdist what people will say or assume about you and how you operate around the world, and then adding on any level of visibility through digital means just is like, what? Like there is another person on the end of that @. Exactly. And they are internalizing these things that you've posited on this body.
Exactly. Thank you.
And they refuse them.
Yeah.
And with what fury can I refuse without creating new problems for myself? But, you know, if there's anything that I would hope for an impossible future is that people have fucking imaginations and consider, you know, that if you're writing to someone, whether it be by a DM or a comment or email or calling on the phone, that you just consider that that person also is a human. That person also has family. That person also experiences loss. That person also experiences gains. You may fuck up their day with a great opportunity. You may, you know, bring great joy, but there's just this lack of consideration that I'm finding more and more, especially amongst my peer group, that's just like, what in what world do you not think that there's a world outside of the world that you want to build with this other person?
I think it's hard for me to think of what I do that faces up with like the limits of what's possible, because I'm so conscientious that like, oh well, like, you know, this thing that I think I can't do, I'm like, no, I can do that. Like, and usually like my desires manifest in that way where I'm like, well, if it's not a thing, then it's not an object of my desire. Like, it's not a thing to me. It's not a thing in my world. It's not, I haven't figured it. Maybe it will be if I can figure it out. And that's a part of the way that I approach, like, you know, working up to the limits of what I know is possible, or like finding out what the limits are. But I recognize that that a lot of the time, a real challenge that I have in sort of getting other people to participate with me in things that I know are possible. Like, oh my God, like very quotidian things like, I'm a business major, I don't need to read literature. And I'm like, listen, this is like the easiest thing we can do. Like, look at this building, look at what you're wearing, look at what I'm wearing. Like, we can do this. This is the easiest thing ever. But getting people to recognize that they are well within the limits of what's doable is a challenge that I set for myself every day, and I know it is totally doable. And along with that, getting people, often like young people and their peers, but really like grown folks, my colleagues, my elders, to recognize that just like regular people are smart, like really smart, like really, really smart. I struggle with how challenging it is for like colleagues and friends and elders and people in, you know, in higher ed, thinking that like, because we're smart and it's our job to be smart, that there's like a, you know, that we're like on a path to like, oh, well, this is where smart people go. And I'm like, no, we do not. Like, very few of us actually do this, right? And it's people around us who have the smarts, right? Who know the things that we need to like indulge in and understand and like sit before and witness. I find that like every time something that's really ordinary comes into my classroom, like recognizing that you really need to feel the bass of music to be hearing it or to be perceiving it. I will, reference something about like, oh, well, there's an us versus them dichotomy. What do we mean by that? Who is the they? And I tried to explain it to students. I was like, the they, they don't want you to have a bigger pool than Kanye. Like, and they're like, what? You're a person? And I'm like, but this is not because I'm smart. It's because you all in the world, like we are all the people who know the things we are trying to figure out. It's just that this is my job, right? And your job is this. Like that's all this is that we've decided to put ourselves in this scenario because we know it's possible. And so I'm always like getting other people to acknowledge that they are within something they can do is a challenge I face daily.
So the them and us, is the them and us useful?
Sometimes, yeah. One thing I always bear in mind is that the us and the we, that has like it has different faces. There's like the us meaning us, but not you, right? Like us. This is what this means to us, right? Like this is us. We have this. We feel this, right? And so you need to get with it, right? And then there's the us that is exactly not that is like us. And I really value that because it allows us to recognize that, like, okay, we can utilize that sense of a collective identity and also of a sort of like a wall that's often like the limit of like empathy, right? Where, oh, okay, actually you can't get across this without entering into the us side of the us, and so you're the them. That came up for us when we were reading On Being Young, a Woman in Colored by Marita Bonner. And I had one student who said like, oh, this is the realest thing I've ever read. And I was like, yeah, but part of it is that Marita Bonner uses the second person in that essay, so she is always pushing you, the reader. So she's saying, you go through this and you go through this. And unless you are young, a woman in colored, you have to reckon with like, oh, she's not literally speaking to me. Sometimes when she's speaking to me and she says, they look down on you and they ask why you're here and they don't expect you to do this, you have to recognize that she's saying it to you, but you are the they. Right. And so I find it's like, actually, it's useful because it's versatile, actually. And being in the side of that they is an educational experience to learn from. But then the opportunity to be part of the us is also like, there are requirements for that. There are limits, and you get to set them by saying it.
I want to like continue with that strain of thought and just add that them and us is like preordained, right? In so many ways, like constructs created through time, through civilization, through colonization, gender, race, all this stuff. Like them and us has been used very divisively. It's been used to disempower people, to create power structures. And so when like, often, or I have heard that, and I have been the receiving end of where people are saying like segregated space, why, right? Like, why are you doing this? Why are you continuously them and using? But the them and us is already a pre-existing structure, and it is not at the fault of or the creation of people of color.
Oh no, exactly.
And that is that's like the biggest misconception. Yeah. So when we are creating segregated spaces, it's not them and using, right? It's literally reappropriating that space and being like, well, it's already here, so let's organize within this structure.
Exactly.
And I just want to like also bring light to community organizing, right? Like I love that we're like able to use a lot of this like academic lexicon, but I also really want to bring light to the fact that community folks, like the people who are not here today, who did not access this event for some reason or another, probably because white supremacy, like are. Oh, what do I mean by that? Probably because white supremacy? Oh dear. Because structural racism? I don't know, I could go on. So basically, like education is probably an intersection here. People didn't know about it, or people weren't connected to the network that would have been conversating about it. The subject matter itself, what is the title? Creating Black Futures? I'm pretty sure that my family would not have read it, or if they had, they would have said, what the fuck is this, right? And this is not about like shade on my family at all. They're really brilliant Dominicans, like they're chilling, but like they probably would not have, they're not here. I was gonna say they probably would never come, but they live in this city and they're not here right now. And you know, we have some dissonance because I'm queer and all that stuff, but like, that's a thing. I want to bring light to that. There are people already organizing on the ground who have the smarts, who have the conversations, who have the language outside of academia, outside of this space, who have been doing this for years and have the tools. It's about, like for me, racial equity, for lack of a better term, or equality is not really the term I'm really going for because I hate that term. Yeah. Equity is really more where I vibe, even though I still think that needs to be decolonized, but let me continue. I really think like in order to do those things, we have to center and restore the power to the people who are on the ground. Community organizers, people who have been disempowered, who are often Black femmes, who are holding those courts, who are holding those spaces, literally creating the space, opening it up, feeding, nourishing on all levels, right? And I just want to bring light to that. I want everyone to notice who's not here today.
Oh, we
right?
We notice it.
Yeah.
No, we live it.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot going on. Could I have the microphone, please? I wish that we had two panels. I wish we had this panel, and then we had the elders over here. There are things that you have said today. First of all, I say to myself, be careful what you wish for. Before Ferguson, I conducted something called a Bill Chat, and it was, when did the avant-garde become Black? You've heard of it?
Have I heard of it?
Yeah.
Has anyone else heard of it?
Has anyone heard of it?
Yeah, I heard of it.
As I was told, it caused a shitstorm. There were people, this was before Ferguson, this was March, right? And everyone was saying, why are you using this language to divide us? Everyone, let's talk about everyone. There were questions that I asked, like, as we merged, is this a white organization? Right. That question for these good people, good liberal people, was like, what is your problem? Why are you so angry, right? Then Ferguson happened, and we all know, everyone, as you guys pastiched it very well, everyone got Black or got upset. But I could not get people down there to say, the Black people on the panel, to say we. They would not say we. And therefore, and the white people in the room were like, they could not understand, well, just that Bill was being a ball buster, right? I was saying, Charlene Warren said to me, oh, I hope we can get funky tonight. I said, I sure as hell wish we could get funky. Right. Hearing you all laugh so freely here and really feel okay being up on the stage is good for my heart, but also, I wonder where, over here, there's Maya, there's Tony, there's James Baldwin, there's all of these other people, and you say that you're living the impossible. It's a bit of an insult. They paid. They paid. This didn't just happen, you know? And you all speak very well. Everyone's mind has been taken care of on this stage. Is that class? You talk like, they said that, you talk like, where I come from, they say.
I'm code switching because I'm on a stage.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hey,
right. Grew up in poverty, still poor.
Don't code switch, dear. Look, this is.
I was raised code switching. I've been bilingual my whole life. My father told me never to speak in mixed company outside of like the collective tongue. You know?
It keeps us alive.
So what
right? We need all the strategies that keep us alive.
What do you speak in the club?
Yeah.
I speak like this all the time. I have no other way of speech. I just want to say that too, because I think that there's something in an assumption of, or not to say that you're doing the assuming, and I would.
Sorry, not to say what?
Not to say that you're doing any assuming about us or how we speak, but this is just how I've always spoken. This is what I've gotten beaten for. This is just like something that like, you know, other Black students tried to beat out of me, or my parents tried to beat into me, and like this is a language and a way of speaking that I've very much earned, and I would never, ever, ever assume that we are an impossible dream because we're sitting right before you, and the heroes on the other panel.
You described yourself as being impossible.
What?
You're living impossible. Someone said.
I think the question was phrased as impossible, but I don't remember saying that.
Yeah, I don't think that that's something
I saw.
that. I think that might have been a wire that's crossed, because I think we're very possible, and these the things that we've earned are hard fought, and not without the context of understanding there are people that created the possibility of our possibilities. But I would never say that we're impossible. I think also perhaps what would be really exciting is to have a third panel of the babies, of just thinking about how, if there's any gift that people of our kind of set have, is that like the people who are coming after us are already here. And so there's this kind of accelerationism that's happening, perhaps because of the internet, and that there's just more people fighting the fight with more knowledge and awareness, and the tools for strategy or for just excitement. And that can be paired with joy as well. But there's, I don't know, I think that maybe that was just a wire that was crossed, and I appreciate you raising that point, because of course we're not impossible, we're right here.
Well, another thing that bothered me was we got a rest.
What'd you say?
We got a nap.
A nap?
Yeah, keep
Absolutely.
going.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
yeah. You know, I got on this stage. My mom went to prison when I was 12 years old, and I'm on this stage
Yes,
anyway,
yeah.
and I got a nap and tired of that. You know what I mean? I have to nap to do my work. I have a solo show next week. I have to sleep between then and now.
Yeah.
You know, I have to keep going.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, in response to the question, as a response to the question that prompted it, I think that the meaning of that and the resonance that it continues to have in our conversation is kind of already like that like we've spoken to it. And I think that part of the challenge of making clear what we mean by claiming our needs, and also claiming sort of where we see the limits of what's possible for us, and how we see the things that we do and want and actively work toward as things that we know have existed only in utopia for people who come before us. Like, that I think is kind of always the way that the utopian imagination works, right? It's just the imagination itself is like, we imagine it, and it's not that it's not real, but it might not be manifest. And so, yes, of course, like, in relation to part of I think the notion of the people who are not here is always valuable, because like, I think, the people who are not here are, of course, the people who are like around but not here. But the people who are not here are also like the people who were here and have left. They are our ancestors.
Exactly.
They are people who don't understand themselves to be part of the project we're engaged in. They're like, there's a lot of variety to that, and I think that's most of what we're speaking to. Yeah. I do think that like from the vantage point of like the language we have access to, and the capacities that we have that seem impossible, that we know have seemed and been really like past the limit of the possible for people who come before us and who are around us. Like, I think that we're saying that based on what we know. Like, I know that like I am the product of what was made possible, what was once impossible because of Joseph Beam. Right? I am made possible because Jose Munoz said, I don't have very good colleagues, I'm going to make some. So he like made a generation of them, right? And like that kind of work is actually ongoing, but it doesn't take the form of dialogue all the time. I mean, like, this is a snapshot of it. Just like I think that us breaking into an exchange like this is also a snapshot of it. Right? So like, the conversation that's going this way is, yes, different from the conversation that's going this way, but they're both necessary.
I'm not sure what this means, but I think, let me say one more time, please. Excuse me, but it's, be careful what you wish for, and you're beautiful. I am gratified, but now I'm having a real deep response, right? In the sense of, do you know where we're sitting, right? Do you know that what it takes to get on the board of directors of this place, 2 black people, right? Do you know what it takes? So you're talking about the people who are not here. So the conversation that we're having, and it's nice, it feels good, but it don't happen every day. And I don't know, everyone there has experience with, quote, white organizations, right? Right? And you're probably, if you're anything, your experience is like me, they feel good that you're there. They want, it makes them look good, right? But where are the people that are not there around my board table? Where are the Oprahs in terms of movement, right? If you write a painting, right, you can buy a painting. But where's the investment in the performance and so on? So there's a lot that makes it possible for this to be happening. And the fact that this picture of this black dude downstairs, and who in the fuck does he think he is, right? On this traditionally colorless organization, right? So I want you to think about that when you say that there's conversation going this way and a conversation going this way. How do we get a greater cultural investment of people of color? How do I get them here? And you're talking about they're not in this room. I know they're not in this room. And it hurts me. I do racial looking at every cultural event I go to. Now, I don't know if there's a problem with me, because that's something that was done to us during the 60s. People like me, who used to beat you, right? Right? Or someone was beat for talking like this. You ain't real, brother. You need white people. Do I need to take you back to 1969, what the discussion was? And I'm not quite sure, do I want everyone to be black and transgender? I want everyone to feel what it feels like to be shit, to be on the outside. I'm trying to understand free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Did he sell me a bill of goods? Did he? Did he sell me a bill of goods? Maybe that, because I'm hearing, you want that? You want them to have the experience that of the most difficult things that separate you from the culture? You want the whole culture to feel that dystopia? I don't get it.
I mean, they make it for themselves. That's the whole point of Hunger Games, right? It's like creating this world where like the dominant culture is now marginalized, you know? So it's like, it's a fiction that people create for themselves all the time.
I'm not even clear, my sister. What do you mean by dominant culture?
The culture that dominates all the other ones here.
Do you mean Miss Oprah? You mean Beyonce?
No, Beyonce lost to Adele at the Grammys.
Damn.
I literally can't mean Beyonce. They tell her every year that we don't mean you.
Oh, if only
you know what I mean?
I can't cry for Beyonce. Yeah. You know, she's a very rich woman, and she's been 22 times.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I don't think that is not. I can't get.
It's not about crying for her. It's about the fact that she made an album. She made an American album, right? She worked with a range of people, right? And she asked people to consider it as greatness, and it was greatness, and they denied it. You know?
Let me be more.
That's political for all of us, telling us the culture that we make that loves ourselves is not enough.
Economically, you're talking about it is changing who controls the power. They are every color now. There are gay people. This guy Thiel.
Those
right?
are exceptions to the rules, right?
So
Like,
I
that's
think we're
really like
And more
Obama
than
as president is an exception to the rule,
Right.
right? Like we can't say that diversity actually means shit.
Right.
It doesn't.
And I think we're talking about structural violence, right? We're talking about the ideology of white supremacy, and we're talking about the structural violence of white supremacy. So we're talking about the structures and systems of the prison industrial complex that keep 3+ million people, like mostly black in prison. Like I'm thinking about like my dad when I was 12 going to prison, you know, for a real long time, and that being so important. Why I nap, right? Like I'm thinking about how we're exhausted all the time, right? And rest is so important to keep going. I'm also thinking about how there's 5 minutes left, and
I'm dominating. Sorry.
no, it's okay.
Yeah.
You're posing such brilliant, important, necessary, urgent questions.
This don't happen.
I know.
Don't
Right.
happen.
Right.
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 Why don't it happen?
Right.
It's happening, and
It's
we're gonna
happening.
keep making it happen.
Why doesn't
Yeah.
why I'm an elder? Why don't I have access to you? Is it because I'm a lazy son of a bitch?
No.
Right?
No.
What is it? What is it? And why are they not here? Why? And in your audiences, what color are they in your audiences? Downstairs, today, Lamar said, let's face it, the black avant-garde is most consumed by white people. And I said, yeah.
My audience is black,
Yeah.
and I keep them here, you know, and they know. Like this bag, I designed it with this organization Apogee, and it has a piece for Sandra Bland that I made on it. And my sister back home reposted it online and showed everyone. You know, like my audience is black. They care what I'm doing.
Yeah,
I don't
I mean
know.
that's another thing. Like, it's such a mysticism, or created sort of a mysticism around how to bring those people into this space.
Yes.
It's actually quite easy.
Yeah.
It's also
It's
going to
about-
those people. Because I think, sorry,
I want to
you finish,
finish.
sorry.
I just want to finish really quick, and I know what you're going to say is going to also be like, bam. But basically, we have to work with people from the ground up, right? Like, we cannot just be like extractive and be like, where are you? Why aren't you here? Are you lazy? Are you not educated? Or da-da-da-da-da. When I show up to a show in Germany, I make sure my audiences are predominantly black. Germany, okay? And the way that I do that is I work really fucking hard. I email everyone I can in my network, and I have the privilege to have an expanded network because of my visibility, because of my hard work. So I have a network. I reach out to that network, networks that other people build, people here on this stage have built, intersect with those people. I reach out. I literally have tea. I have meals. I have conversations. Literally just ask, hey, can we just like face to face real quick? And yeah, I'm not an institution. Yeah, I'm not a white institution. This is really where it starts. Like when black artists are like wondering, I'm like, what happened? Where are your black friends? Like literally, why are you wondering when you go back home or you're like having your dinner parties and there's still only white people at your dinner parties? Like that's not even a read, really. I mean, it is. But truly though, like really, it's not that, it's really not a mysticism. We have to literally open the doors. A place like this has a lot of access. It's like situated in actually a very central part of the city. There's a lot of options. I do this work called structural race work. I consult organizations on how to diagnose their structural barriers, the barriers that exist and stop people like me or my community or communities that black folks or other marginalized groups intersect from coming into your space, not only just coming, but actually engaging, actually interested, and contributing, and sitting at the table with you. Like that's the work that I get paid to do for white institutions. I invoice people for that.
Yeah. It's also like, it takes, my job. I have my job because even though my school was not hiring a lot of people to be English professors in the past 20 years, the woman who instituted African American literature at my school died too soon, and they wanted to replace her with somebody who also teaches African American literature, which like I only learned because people had to institute it a generation before me. But you know, it will take me like another like 20 years to be doing the kinds of things she was doing when she left that role open. But in the meantime, like I think of, you know, my own mentor academically took like 30 years to get to where she's at now, where she can really make things move and is on boards of directors. One of my best friends here is 50 and like is doing some very significant transformational stuff in the role he's in now. But like he had to live to 50 and he had to do things with that time and on terms that were not that friendly, and he and counterparts of him elsewhere are in similar circumstances. And I think like frankly that's why we talk about needing to take a nap, is that like we die sooner, we struggle against more, and so there are fewer of us. Like our life expectancies are cut shorter by the fact that enough of us have to be able to make it to the point where things are possible for us. Like when I think of like the provost of my university is black, there is Valerie Smith is president of Swarthmore, and she's an African American literature scholar. And I'm like, there are probably like 4 or 5 African American scholars of African American stuff, right, who know about and care about the stuff that I do, who have been college presidents. There are probably, of PWIs, of HBCUs, there are probably 3 times as many, but they don't have the resources that people who navigate PWI boards of trustees and endowments do. And so like a big part of that is, at the same time, like for every Valerie Smith, there is an Elaine Delancey at Drexel who didn't make it that long. And there are, when I was in college, the chair of, I think the chair of African American Studies at Maryland, who was a black woman, died at middle age. And like, that is why we talk about needing naps, is because we need to expand Medicaid so that we can get our cancer caught on time, so that we can get our transition care without having to undergo like all kinds of additional violence from the institutions that police our bodies. Like, we need to have access to, you know, the medicinal marijuana market that everybody else seems to be really making a killing off right now, that we've been systematically excluded from. So like, there are all of these things that we're talking about right now that do really translate into like, let me find out about reflexology, let me see if I can get my passport, let me see if like, never mind what letters are on the passport, right? But like, let me see if I can get my passport so I can go to Cuba while this is happening. But eventually that results in, okay, I did make it to Switzerland. Okay, I did write that novel. Okay, I did get a Guggenheim Fellowship. Maybe I will get on that board of trustees. But the reason that the ranks of our peers and elders at different cohorts don't make it to where they ought to be is that there are fewer of us and we start with less. But also because, and I'm thinking now of like a very narrow and abstract, like a very, I'm like hypothesizing that the way that many people of African descent come from cultures that understand age sets as social groups, like that cultural background, that knowledge does not often readily translate into like the bourgeois meritocracy that we have in the United States. It didn't come with us. It doesn't really travel the way that other things do. So we don't have really a firm understanding of like, how do age sets relate to each other? How do people 10 or 12 years apart in age relate to each other? How do cousins and nieces and nephews relate to each other? And to the extent that we build that stuff up, it's really valuable because those are the structures we need if and when we do persist. But in the meantime, we're very, like, it is so essential that my sister takes a nap because she will not be there to take over the board when people are gone. Like, she will not be there to catch up, right? Even having to run twice as fast to catch up earlier than other people would. Like, like that's what we're talking about.
I want to speak to, when I heard you guys talk about the nap, I really chuckled. I loved it. And the reason I loved it because I direct the dance program at the University of Alabama, and I've been there for 24 years, and I travel back and forth. And I've been teaching a lot of people in the South to say, black people, you can take a nap without getting sick, because they all would have to be sick in order to think that they could take a nap.
Yeah.
And I've been teaching my family that. And trust me, living in Alabama for 24 years directing a dance program, I don't have to tell you what that takes. But what it saved me, literally, I have a massage on Mondays and Fridays because I need one to start with those people on Monday. And by Friday, what I've gone through emotionally, my body needs some work. So I totally get what you guys are talking about. I mean, literally to teach my family members to stop falling out because they just simply want a nap. I was like, you can take a nap without being sick.
I mean, I think about how dance education was vital in understanding that for myself, right? Like, I went to dance school in New York. I went to eventually school in LA for dance, and so much of being able to actually perform on stage with a healthy body, one that is hydrated, one that is warm and easily and stretching and whatever it is, I need to be able to rest. All of those things require preparation and training, just like living a black life. Like, I need to be able to go to the gym and get my health on and get my cardio on and get my muscles built so that if I need to run away from some white supremacists, I can.
That's right.
I wish I was joking, but I have actually run away from white supremacists.
I think that's why I get to understand, what you guys are saying. It's not a marathon sprint. And even if I do take a nap, because I've had to offer to train myself to do that, there are other people who are still doing the work.
Yes.
We can't put time or we pass it off. So it's not like the work is not being done.
Exactly.
It's still being done, and I think that's important to know because I'm also from a generation that we're told, no, you can't rest. You have to work your ass off. And I want you, if you get exhausted, then you're doing it right. So.
Yeah, I think that there's something really important in understanding the power of increments, and thinking about the small work and the slow work, especially thinking about who is in spaces. Because I similarly, if I'm doing something, I try to reach out to particular communities. I've been really invested in the random act of kindness, where I just like reach out to someone who like doesn't think anybody else is looking. And I think an organization that does that on a larger scale that I really admire and adore is the Laundromat Project. It's an organization that brings artists and places them into communities, usually communities that the artists themselves live in, and it's a New York-based project. But thinking about something like that as a model for how institutions can move forward, or thinking about something like Mark Bradford's Art and Practice in a neighborhood that he himself grew up in, where you can like still smell the motions from the hair salon from his mother. Thinking about embedding ourselves into different communities that we want to find ourselves in, and not in this weird like university way, like you go down to Baltimore and Micah literally is absorbing all of Baltimore, but thinking about how we can earn invitations to the spaces that we want to find ourselves in, and specifically Black spaces. And it's not a super abstract idea. It's going to community centers. It's going to programming that may not be our own, or something that's a little bit outside of our comfort zone. Being a guest. I mean, I go to church. I go to actual real church. I go as a guest with my mother once a quarter. And I think about how quiet I am in that space, because I know I'm a visitor and I know I'm a guest. And I think, to your point about the us and them and the we's and those kinds of like grouping, coupling languages are something that I try to refuse, because I think that it then denies personal experience, and it also denies like the slowness of what a personhood looks like. But I do think, as we're thinking about especially boardships and philanthropy, I'm super passionate about that, because like I don't have a ton of money, but I give what I have to organizations that I love. Like Apogee is an organization I give money to. Laundromat Project is an organization I give money to. I'm on the Studio Society for the Studio Museum and for the Schomburg Center. I give them like $50, but like if everybody I knew gave $50 to these types of organizations, like what amazing work would be done. You don't have to be like a Guggenheim YCC member to make an impact with an organization. It's really about awareness and thoughtfulness and visitorship and stewardship too, because there's so much that can be done through volunteer work that never is talked about when you think about philanthropy and donation. But those are questions, Bill, to your point, that I'm thinking through a lot. And I try to find myself as an advocate for just creating moments of radicality in the spaces that I find myself in, whether that be on the boards that I sit on or the stages that I sit on. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We have one more question, and then we kind of have to wrap this up because we're running late. We have another show later downtown. So.
I'm not from the United States, but I wanted to point out the work of Amara Smith, because I'm now in Berkeley, and she, I believe she's an African-American choreographer that is doing a 7-night sleeping piece in a secret location in Oakland, only with Black women. And I think it's in honor of Harriet Tubman, that she used to dream the passages of the Underground Railroad. I find Amara fascinating, and the piece is called A House Full of Black Women. And I know.
Amara Smith, you said?
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Amara who? Amara Tabor Smith. Remember that, y'all.
Well, I want to thank all of the brilliance that's in the room, on the stage, and in the audience, and what we're making together. People being really generous with their time and their insights and their feelings. We're doing it together, so thank you.